Growing up in Rawlins, you hear stories about ghosts at the Old Pin. You hear, on a good day, it's creepy, right? On a bad day, it's terrifying.
Hi, welcome back to That Doesn't Happen Every Day, in which we interview everyday people about things that have happened to them that don't usually happen every day. In the soundbite at the beginning of this story, you hear my friend CJ Young, who had talked about seeing the Lady of Arlington. He's relating what it was like to work in an historic prison in downtown Rawlins that, if you've ever been there, is truly freaky. This intro is going to run a little bit long, and I apologize for that, but I really want to set the stage for what that place is truly like. I've been to places that felt somber or really sad, like Dachau concentration camp and Buchenwald when I was stationed in Germany, and with all due respect to what happened to the people who lived in those places and unfortunately died, I think the most in-your-face, outright spooky place I have ever been is the penitentiary CJ's talking about, the frontier prison in Rawlins, Wyoming. It was opened in 1901, and like a lot of prisons built at that time, it was made to intimidate you as soon as you pull up. It has very thick, rough-hewn stone walls that are really high. It has guard towers that look like turrets from a castle. On the inside, it's very dirty, it's very dark. You can walk right into the prisoners' cells and see the graffiti they've left behind. I remember one had a pentagram. Then they take you into the shower room, which is dingy and spooky to begin with, and show you how prisoners would break tiles off of the wall into really sharp shards and stab each other in the shower. Then they take you into the gas chamber, and there's no plexiglass or any barrier between you and what happened. You can walk right into the gas chamber and sit in the chair where people were executed. In addition to just an overall aura of something, frankly, dirty or creepy that was going on in there, I remember through the whole tour, I just got the feeling like I shouldn't be there, or like I was looking at things that I shouldn't be able to see. In the early 2000s, CJ decided he needed a job and went to work as a tour guide in the spookiest place I've ever seen. In this episode, CJ tells us what it was like working there and some of the things he saw and heard that don't usually happen every day.
I started working at the Wyoming Frontier Prison. It was right around when I graduated high school, back in 2004. For my first week, they had me go sweep leaves out of the gallows, and that was the creepiest thing I had ever done up until that point. Because, you're standing there with this broom, and you're kind of keep looking up at this trap door, and you're like, okay, this is where 9 people were hung. This is really disturbing. The first time I experienced something that was unusual, it was in my first couple weeks, and I was giving a tour. On Cell Block A, there's an area called the Dark Side. And it's called the dark side because there's almost no natural light. If there's no lights turned on, it's essentially pitch black. And in the back of these cells, if you're standing at the back of them, you cannot see anyone there. Someone could be standing 6 feet from you and you can't see them. But if you're that person standing in the cell looking out, you can see because there's enough ambient light that you can see someone else. So it's this kind of one-way effect of vision. To illustrate it, what we would do is when you give the tour, you stop there, you ask for a volunteer. So, it's kind of a fun moment. Everyone's kind of like, oh, who's going to be the brave one? So I'm giving this tour, and it was to a group of tourists from Japan. They had a translator, but didn't speak a lot of English. And this elder Japanese gentleman, he stepped forward to walk to the back of the cell, and I pointed, and his translator said, walk till you hit the wall. And he starts to go in, and this blast of air, like someone turned on a big fan, comes out of the back of the cell. I'll mind you, this is a cell that was built in 1888. It doesn't have a central air system. It's a stone room. This air, like someone opened a door or turned on a fan, blew out. You could feel it on your clothes, your face, your hair. And this Japanese gentleman, he jumped out of this cell and he starts yelling in Japanese. And the translator says, there's something in there. He said, there's someone in there. So I got out my, cell phone light and I turned it on and it's empty. There's no one in there, but he was freaked out. The tour was freaked out. And I'll admit to being a little, well, that was strange. Another time I was closing and I'm going through with the gift shop manager. We're closing up and we go lock up the death house and death row and we're coming back. We had walked by no more than 10 minutes at most prior to that. There was nothing there. And as we come back through the library, right in front of us, we both stopped and are staring at the floor because there are wet footprints that are coming out of the barber shop. That looks like someone walked out of the barber chair and their feet were wet. and they turn and walk into what we call the crossover. And these wet footprints, we follow them, and they go into the crossover, and they stop about 2/3 through the crossover, and they're gone. And then there's that moment, especially when you're with someone else, where you look at each other and you're like, wow, is this real? Did this just happen? And you could reach down and touch and feel the moisture. We both went to the barbershop. We checked the sink. There's no running water in there. Either this was paranormal or it was a super elaborate hoax by someone who knew the building, knew where water was, knew our route and how long they had the keys to do it. On top of that, I don't know if you could have got away with it that quick. Could you have carried a bucket of water in, made the wet footprints, got out of your shoes, and then run away without spilling any water from the bucket? I question how you could have done in that time. Which again, it's not impossible, right? I can't rule it out. I have to be realistic. But I would say it's highly improbable. And when you realize that there's not a logical explanation, there's kind of a spookiness, an unsettling that kind of settles in. But there's an excitement too, right? Because I think most, maybe not everyone, but the vast majority want to experience something in life that's hard to explain, right? That is unusual or mysterious, or whatever that would be in whatever walk of life you're in. Another time I was giving a tour. So when you start off the tour, there's 3 little rooms you go through. In the second to the last room, there's a pole in the middle of the room, and it's called the punishment pole. And they used to handcuff inmates to that pole, and they'd be flogged from that pole. And there's a little window there. Legend always said they would leave that open and you could hear the man being whipped or flogged. And so it was kind of a way to demonstrate, essentially open punishment. What happens if you misbehave? So I've done this tour 100 times, at this point. And I'm going through my routine and I open the window and I keep talking about the punishment pole. And I noticed a voice coming from the window, a whisper. It was human. It was a person. I think it was a man's voice, but it was like it was talking too fast or muffled. It was like you couldn't quite. It was like a muffled, like, "Hey, how you doing? What you been doing there?" Like you can't quite make it out, but you can tell there's words. I had maybe 6, 7 people on my tour. They're looking at me. They're looking at the window over to behind my right shoulder, and I notice from their faces, they're starting to smile and kind of move to look in the window. They can hear it too. And finally, I stop. And I very softly, I'm like, "Can you all hear that too?" And they kind of nod their heads. And everyone, we just all went silent. And we're listening to this voice coming from the window, very distinctly from that window. And it just stops. It cuts off. And something else had happened that I didn't even realize. It was like the air had gotten heavier, like static electricity on your body. And it was like it just dissipated instantly. It was like the air got lighter. It was like this, like you discharged the static and it was gone. And I remember one of the ladies was like, "No way." And this guy, kind of a big burly guy, looked like maybe an oil field worker or construction worker. And he's like, "You got somebody back there." And I was like, "No, I'll take it back and show you." So we kind of break out of the normal tour and I walk him back and I show him that the other side of this window is the old guard's cage. That's a separate barred locked area. There's no one in there. It's closed and there's no electricity in there. It's not like someone just plugged in a radio or turned it on, right? He was sure. He's like, "You got to be screwing with us to try and get, excitement." And I said, "No, I said, I've never had this happen before." We continued and that became the talk of the rest of the tour. We were seeing other things, but everybody kept coming back to like, "Man, did anybody figure out what he was saying? What was happening?" And it was later that summer. It gives me chills almost thinking about it now. I was reading this inmate's journal, Stanley Hudson, and kept a journal when he was there in 1908 to 1912, that rough time frame. And he is talking about this moment of this one particular warden who they all hated. And what they hated about him is they said the man would punish you and not give you any reasons. You just end up being punished. And I'll always remember, I get to the point of Stanley's journal where he says they called him the Whispering Warden, is what the inmates called him. He'd stand at the window in the changing room, which is where we were, and he would call guards over and he would whisper to them through that window at a level that no one could hear other than the guard, pointing out who should be punished and why, and no one would know why. And so they'd call him the Whispering Warden because he'd whisper through that window all the time. And it may have literally no connection, but man, it sent chills down my spine to read that from someone 100 years earlier, and having had that experience of that whisper coming through that window at that time, and not just me, but half a dozen people all heard it at once. So I do think that events that happen in history impact a location. So we have an area of the old pen called the shower room, a very unassuming name for the most sinister room in the prison. It's dark, it's cold, and we know from the records that multiple, I'm talking probably 10 plus, maybe more, murders happened there. The vast majority of us always felt uncomfortable in that area. Even people that were skeptics about ghosts admitted the shower room made them feel uncomfortable to be in there. The atmosphere, the aura of the place. The shower room, to me, has a heavy, bad feeling about it because there were predators there. There were human predators. And my personal opinion is that in death, maybe those bad people, those bad spirits, go to what they knew. They preyed on people there, and the spirits are predatory in death. That's my own personal theory. And I do think that is maybe why you have so many things happen in the old penitentiary, because the people that were there in life, many of them, not all, but many of them probably enjoyed scaring people, intimidating, hurting people even. And in death, I have no reason to believe their spirit would be any different, right? That's my theory as to maybe what some of the differences are there. I got into the habit of every time I left the prison, when I would get to my car, I would turn around and I would say, "Thank you, but please stay here." And it's superstitious, I know, and maybe a bit silly, but I always felt like if you were polite to the spirits, maybe they weren't going to mess with you or follow you home, because that was always my paranoia is, am I going to wake up and see somebody standing at the end of my bed at home, or am I going to have weird experiences at home now? And that was something I always worried about and was paranoid about. And I never did, but it was to this day when I visit, I say that even as a visitor, no longer a tour guide there, 15 years later. So.
Thank you for listening to today's story. If you go to the description for this episode, you can click on the link and visit the website to plan your trip to visit the Frontier Prison in Rawlins. It's still open for tours. The other link in the description will take you to the 1987 trailer for a movie called Prison, which was in fact filmed, I believe, inside and outside of that spooky old prison. It's a horror movie from the 80s, so one way or the other, it's a win-win if you want to check that out. Finally, if you have a story of something that happened in your life that doesn't happen every day and that's interesting, it doesn't have to be paranormal or supernatural. The bottom line is it just has to be uncommon and interesting. Please email me and let me know more about what happened. Please tune in to our next episode that should be at you in about a week. Thanks.